Hi, I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar on where we'll be exploring the state of civil society in the Euro-Mediterranean area. My name is Dimitrios Triantaphyllou. I'm the director of the Center for International European Studies. And actually, this webinar is the first of a series of webinars as part of Anna Lindh Foundation project that is basically starting an Anna Lindh Foundation project exploring with the title Vadis, Euro-Med Civil Society. And it's a project where the CIES is a partner together with our partners. Our leader is the Croatian head of network, together with Fotoessa in Athens, EMED in Barcelona, and the House of Europe in Rhodes. And it's a pleasure to be able to have with us four heads of network. There are three right now, but hopefully we'll have the fourth one as well. Heads of Anna Lindh heads of network from Germany, from Lebanon, from Greece, and Tunisia. And I must admit that I would not have been able to put this webinar together had it not been. Oh, there's Anis. How are you, Anis? Hi, good to see you. Had it not been for Stefanos Vallianatos, who helped get through and get in touch with all of you. And so we'll start we have, as I said, four speakers. And let me make very brief introductions, introduce them briefly. We have Caroline Robertson von Trotha, who is the head of network, the Anna Lindh head of network from Germany. Professor Caroline Robertson von Trotha was born in Glasgow, Scotland, but after studies in sociology, philosophy, and history in Heidelberg and Karlsruhe, and she finalized her dissertation in sociology and at University of Karlsruhe, which today is called the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. She is, in 2004, she's a founding director of the Center for Culture and General Studies, or otherwise known as ZAC, at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. And her research focuses on cultural change and globalization, internationalization, multiculturalism, as well as theory and practice of public science. And as I said, she's a coordinator of the German network of the Anna Lindh Foundation, a member of the Culture Committee of the German UNESCO Commission, and the chairwoman of the Academic Council for Culture and Foreign Policy at the Institute for Foreign Cultural Relations. Also with us is Zeina El-Hage, who is a holder of a master's degree in psychology. She has been working for the past 10 years as an activity coordinator at the Lebanese Commission for UNESCO, and as well as handling the tasks of the national coordinator of the Lebanese network of the Anna Lindh Euro-Med Foundation. Also is Anis Boufrikha, who has studied international economics, development, entrepreneurship, and creative entrepreneurship. He has previously worked at the African Development Bank, and in 2011 created an association called We Love Sousse, which I gather is his hometown. And in 2012, launched the network We Love in 6 different countries. He is, since 2012, the leader or the head of network of the Tunisian network, national network of the Anna Lindh Foundation. And he coordinates a national network of more than 120 associations and develops synergies and projects with 40 other networks of the foundation. In 2015, he founded his own firm through which he steers several projects and research work, provides consulting and expertise related to his areas of expertise. And he's also the founder of several initiatives and projects, such as the Euro-Arab Youth Forum, the Maghrebian Youth Forum, and the Tunisian-Libyan Forum. Finally, our last speaker, Stefanos Vallianatos, who holds a PhD in the field of international politics with special reference to the Middle East and the East Mediterranean from Lancaster University. He has taught Middle East politics and history and politics of the Balkans at the International Center for Hellenic and Mediterranean Studies in Athens, and he frequents frequently in the Greek media and abroad. He is the head of network of the Greek National Network of the Anna Lindh Foundation. And he's involved in a number of projects, including one on active citizenship and social entrepreneurship, which had been organized both by the Anna Lindh Foundation, the Greek National Network of the Anna Lindh Foundation, the hosting and organization of the annual meeting of the Lazord Foundation Fellowship for NGO Leaders. He's participated in the Networking European Citizenship Education Preparatory Meeting, NESE's meeting in Thessaloniki in 2015, and is part of its focus group on the exchange between Europe and North Africa. So as you can see, the four speakers are very active in the network, have been involved in many years. They know each other well. I'm getting to know them. Stefanos Vallianatos is, of course, is an old friend, and I've known him for many years. And Stefanos is very interesting because, like myself, I am an international relations person that over the last few years has evolved to also dealing with civil society. So it's about, you know, one's role as an active citizen and how you get engaged in your society. So I've asked our speakers to maybe briefly talk for about 10 minutes to talk to us about where they view Euromed civil society. Also, in light of the fact that this year we are celebrating 25 years since the signing of the Barcelona Declaration, where basically the term Euromed, Euro-Mediterranean region, was in a way officially coined. And so where is civil society in the Euro-Mediterranean region today and where it's going? So we'll start with Caroline. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very pleased to be part of this. And I think maybe in our strange and difficult times of this year, one thing that we do have, which is positive, is that we are suddenly getting much more organized to have webinars and to get together and to use the tools which are available to us. So having said that, of course, it's always much nicer also to see the public, which I think is one of the big changes when we do webinars, which across the Anna Lindh Foundation, we even had our head of network meeting with all the 42 states as a 3-day, very strenuous, but I think fairly efficient webinar. So obviously there are big changes and there's a lot we are missing, but at the same time, it is also giving us new opportunities. So let me just make a few more sort of general comments. Maybe as also because I have been asked to be the first, then I can maybe just start to put some sort of framework or questions or comments. First of all, if we are asking Quo Vadis Euromed civil society, I would first comment, I would ask the question, can we speak about one Euromed civil society? I think that is a goal we have. It is a goal that we are all working towards, but I think it is a very questionable kind of a construct, and it is a construct. So maybe my second comment would be, we are putting the whole question of Quo Vadis within the context of the Barcelona process, 25 years. And so building on what I've just said, then I think even the question of what is understood as a Euromed civil society or what civil societies are, have changed considerably over time and over space. And I am sure that if we look at the question of civil societies, we can very easily attest to the fact that development of civil societies is not linear. We go forwards, we go backwards, we have major disruptions, and we have major effects of what we are doing. Some, as we would say from sociology, very often we have effects which we expect and which are good, and effects which we don't expect, but are also good, and the opposite. We have expectations of what we are doing in theory and in practice, which are not positive and not expected, or expected and of course not positive. What we have not found the tools and the means to prevent the non-positive developments. So that's kind of sort of theoretical first sort of comment on what we are doing and where we are going. A second sort of general comment I would want to make is also regarding to the construct of civil society. And I would like to keep it also for our discussion within also the framework of a construct, a changing construct. Because within that construct, we can talk about regional or international, or we can talk about the local. And I think the importance of these different spaces has also changed over time. We find now that we used to talk about foreign policy and communication across regions and states and nations, which of course is still important, but more often now we have to look at the situation within cities. And I think this is one of the changes which, with the question of action and of education, of involvement, of democratic creativity also, that we are looking always more at the construct of civil society in the cities. If we look at the cities, then obviously we are realizing how interrelated and intertwined international, intercultural space is. And very often these are talking about the expected and the non-expected. We don't always see the kind of interaction which is taking place simultaneously across these areas of space. We find, for instance, very international spaces within cities, but we also find extremely homogenic areas and quarters of cities which do not interact as an international civil society. So these are just very general kind of questions which we could maybe deepen on or not, but I think these are sort of ongoing framework conditions which we tend to lose out of sight when we're talking about our huge, enormous variety of activities and also of civil society organizations who have a wealth of innovative actions to connect. And certainly I think one of the key questions we have to look at is also the whole question of connectivity. How we organize connectivity across time, across space, to involve people in being aware of the wealth of difference, but also, of course, the effects wanted or non-wanted across these spaces. So you see, my first comments have not been very helpful to you. They are more general, but I think it is just one point that we have to make, because it maybe allows us sometimes to stretch out and see that we do have to understand why very often we become segmented in certain areas. We forget broader contexts, and so it is very difficult to monitor what is happening in our larger context. We often get into our own bubbles of activities, but we don't see what is happening outside that space. And I think if we tie that up again to the situation of mega trends, then we have to maybe also ask ourselves what we mean by connectivity. How can we connect within clusters of our activities. And of course, within the Anna Lindh Foundation, maybe I should also just mention for those who are maybe listening and are not aware of our Anna Lindh Foundation, which has over 4,200 members across 42 nations, that in fact we have a huge wealth of different activities of different organizations which can network together following different activities and different goals within the amazing amount of questions which we could be answering. So maybe if I ask about civil society more at a sort of practical level, I also have to look at the situation at the nation, the sort of nation state, which is also the organization of governance when we look at our Anna Lindh Foundation. That in fact, over the 25 years there, we have seen enormous and huge changes and differences. Maybe one thing which we can see across most of our societies is the trend to polarization. We find populism and polarization of, with us in Germany, to be more concrete, certainly more right-wing anti-Semitism, right-wing movements across the space within Germany. Interestingly enough, we also find that, in fact, the growing amount of right-wing extremism is even more in the what we still call, well, we don't really still call them the new East German states, where we would have always expected them to be more international. So that may tie up to what I was saying. They are things one doesn't always see and always doesn't expect, because there, of course, their own understanding was of international solidarity and not so much of the national. But we can maybe see that within that kind of context, we have to look at the self-images and the images from outside of how we define ourselves at the national level, at the regional level, and at the very, very particularistic level of civil society organizations, which are often with a certain purpose or a certain goal that they are following. Maybe I will finish with a further, and I'm just keeping to my general remarks, and in our discussion we can look more clearly at different goals or different areas which we are following. But I think that if we look at this kind of development, it makes quite clear that we have to look both at analysis, we need research, we need data-based evidence on the way our societies are changing, the dynamics of the change of societies, and we have to realize that that cannot be defined in a national or a regional kind of a context within our present situation. We have a much more dynamic way we have to look at things. The second point, we have to look at capacity building and also educational programs. How do we interest also within concepts of not just youth and women as the two main groups within the Anna Lindh Foundation, but how do we generally look at raising awareness to become interested in what change means and how we can involve ourselves in influencing change and advocacy for policy. And the third area would be the area of outreach, of public science, public diplomacy, public cultural debate, all things which I think can be looked at within the context of the huge wealth of organizations within the Anna Lindh Foundation, but over that and above, I think we also have to remember and remind ourselves that many of the organizations which are in the Anna Lindh Foundation, for instance, UNESCO, are organizations which don't only look and are active within the Euro-Mediterranean context, but over and above in a further international context. And I think that also is a great resource that we have, so that we have to look and see that we don't get tied up in our own UFM or context within a certain space, with not realizing that we have to also look at the larger context. So sorry for being rather framework, more theoretical, but maybe it would just set this sort of larger framework to continue our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I mean, you don't have anything to be sorry about. I think you've set a very nice framework out there with a lot of food for thought. And I mean, I especially like the fact that you raised the thing about cities. It is a reality. 50% of the world's population lives in urban settlements. And we know that in a 20 years time or so, there'll be about 70 of us. And it's true that the cities have become a microcosm of everything that's good and bad in the world. And this is a reality within which we have to live in. And I think you mentioned the term disruption, and there is major disruption going on. We focus a lot on systemic change as an international relations scholar. I can see this happening. We are going through systemic change. Multilateralism is slowly being replaced by multipolarity and whatever impact that has. But as you correctly, I think, pointed out towards the end of your presentation, at times we do not really focus on what's happening within our societies and how this impacts. So if we are in the midst of systemic change, well, this impacts civil society's work as well. And there's always sort of a disconnect between the two. Anyway, let me give the floor to Zeina now, who I think will talk more also about what is happening in her own country, Lebanon, and then we'll continue our conversation. Zeina, go ahead.
Thank you, Dimitrios, and thank you for having me in this event. I will talk more about the state of the civil society organizations in Lebanon, especially after everything that's been going on, especially with the rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. So when it happened, when the COVID-19 arrived in Lebanon in late February, the country was several months into what is arguably its deepest political, social, and economic crisis. And the pandemic just intensified prevailing challenges and vulnerabilities that were in the country. Everything was going downfall. Business across the country was shuttered. Our national currency, the lira, Lebanese lira, is in severe decline ever since. Prices were inflated in the supermarket everywhere, and education was interrupted, as was the case in all the countries. So civil society organizations found themselves serving as first responders to the crisis, alongside the responses to meet essential needs and help the families affected and offer financial aid when possible. They also work to defend the rights of those vulnerable, such as women and girls, refugees, minorities, migrants, and persons with disabilities. So I will give us just a few examples on how civil society in Lebanon was able to like best practices. So for example, among the people that were affected were women who became much more exposed to gender-based violence while in lockdown, for example, at home. And so some organizations campaign for policies to protect excluded groups and create remote services to help them. For example, some organizations use the online and offline means to encourage women at risk from domestic violence to use its helpline, sometimes through a picture on Instagram, through a comment, just very implicitly. And so sometimes civil society cooperated with the state as much as possible, and sometimes even it did not wait for them to act and often moved more rapidly than states could. Civil society organizations took responsibility, showed leadership, and modeled responses that could be scaled up. For example, what happened on August 4 in Lebanon, the powerful explosion that ripped through Beirut, killing at least 200 people, injuring more than 7,000, and making more than 300,000 homeless. On top of the COVID-19 pandemic and the social economic crisis, the civil society organizations were among the first to respond, supporting rescue, cleanup efforts, distributing food and medical supplies, providing psychosocial services. Many of our members from the Lebanese network not only engaged in immediate relief, but also launched projects to support the affected people and provided all sorts of material and psychological support. However, of course, the pandemic had a substantial impact on their work. The operations of civil society organizations, they faced many challenges. I will state a few. For example, most field-based activities had to be postponed, canceled, or digitized. Projects were delayed or even suspended. Some of them even had to request extensions for their projects that were not adaptable to the new circumstances. Lack of funding, this is the most important challenge. Funding transfers were delayed. In Lebanon, for example, we have a problem nowadays with foreign currencies. We're unable to access dollars or euros. So new funding opportunities became limited. Fundraising events had to be postponed or canceled. So most of the organizations are struggling to maintain staff levels and cover basic operational services. And with fewer funding opportunities, higher competition over grants, and of course, a decline in government support. So the main challenges for these organizations is one of surviving the crisis they are exposed to in Lebanon. And a second challenge would be that now they have to adapt their services. They have to digitize most of their activities through webinars, Zoom, whatever, especially in response to the fallout of the COVID-19. So many organizations are in need of financial assistance in the crisis, and of course, in need of an appropriate and comprehensive plan to tackle the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic. And especially that the workload of civil society has increased in the past years. And with more work comes more responsibility and the need to manage expectations. That's why it's important to build partnerships and enhance cooperation at the local, national, and regional level. And of course, to exchange data, to exchange knowledge, to exchange their best practices and experiences. And so mainly, if we want later, we can discuss in the discussions some recommendations or to be able to address these challenges. Mainly. So this was just view. Sorry.
Yeah.
Dimitrios, you wanted to.
No. Did you finish? You have something else to say? Yeah.
No, I can. We can discuss the recommendations and everything later and the suggestions for.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, you took it to reality on a very practical level and some of the challenges faced. And I think some of the things you raise, it's interesting because there you can say that some of the parallels are issues raised, whether we talk about Europe, the northern part of the Mediterranean or the southern part of the Mediterranean. The issues that, on the ground activities is limited severely because of COVID-19. And so, the fact that you end up digitizing and it has an impact on your services. Another issue you raise, I think, that came to my mind when we talk about Lebanon is also what is the limit between the responsibility of the state and civil society organizations? Because what you described, the civil society organizations taken on responsibilities that should have been the states. And exactly. that in itself is something, that one has to consider. And also when you talk about funding, because I think this is an issue that will keep coming up, is whether, we can see a recommendation, whether this is an opportunity also for CSOs right now, as we are moving slowly away from the pandemic to probably a more hybrid world, to shape the funding agenda and not to have it driven by donors, because this is also an issue right now, because civil society organizations in Lebanon, as you described, but I think in many other places, have also a lot of lessons learned. I mean, because of the difficulties in dealing with challenges, but also in the fact that they've been doing work, filling in for the state, of providing services. So how does this affect future funding? Anyways, just some ideas that have occurred there as you were talking. Let me now give the floor to Stefanos Vallianatos, the head of network from Greece. Turn on your sound.
Thank you very much, Dimitrios, and it's a real pleasure that to have such colleagues, such friends, actually. Even though we didn't have the chance to meet in face-to-face this year, and with Zeina, it has been 2 years since Brussels, if I remember correctly. I think Karolina has actually outlined a very useful framework, and therefore I would like to take it from there and have some general comments about the state of the art with civil society in the Euromed zone at large, but also concentrate a bit on the Greek experience, and maybe through that take some conclusions for the wider scene. First of all, 25 years of the Euromed partnership and the Union, and later to become the Tanzanians. I have to start with a very positive notion, and this is: it seems that at least in terms of the civil society organizations on both sides of the sea, this entity, as a point of reference of them, has been internalized. It looks as if more and more such institutions look towards this space as their natural backyard, and therefore a place to not only to become active, but also to look for partnerships, and also to, even though I might argue that this is not in itself a systemic region, nevertheless, it gains momentum through that. Now, this, of course, is by definition the result of a lot of effort that has been put on it, especially from the European side, and the civil society space has been something that has been invested a lot in many directions. Let's remember that it was perceived as a tool, as a vehicle for democratic transformation in the eastern neighborhood of the European Union, and including in the Middle East. In the Middle East, but especially in the Mediterranean area. This is one point I wanted to raise. The other point is that this region has, in those 25 years, has experienced gigantic and life-changing events. The rapprochement between the Arab world and Israel on the one hand, the rapprochement, the economic crisis, but also the Arab Spring, which allow me to say that although many would argue that it's actually a dead letter, I still believe that what we are going through in a number of countries, including Lebanon and elsewhere, is the echoes, or is actually the Arab Spring continuing in existence. And I think Tunis is the bright example of something that would lead the way, and in all respects, because it will find a lot of bumpy roads ahead of it. The other thing that I noted is that with regard to this one, and I think Caroline outlined more the negative ones, I would just like to express also a rather neutral one, and this is that the emergence, and maybe I would like to make a distinction, not even though it's an internal one, a kind of distinction between NGOs per se and civil society organizations as such. There's a little bit of a difference, and having said that, the reason is that, I mean, emanating from my experience in Greece, is that to a large degree, along the political system during the last years has been discredited for many respects, but along that, it was also the NGO, a lot of the NGOs would have been discredited. So therefore, there is something to get into consideration, the need probably of a code of conduct or other things. I don't want to make the distinction as such, but definitely there is something to take into consideration about the behavior mode. The third one is that I think the pressure or the successful operation of a number of civil society organizations, and including one aspect of it, which I will come back to with the social entrepreneurship, we have seen an increase of the social awareness and the social sensitivities that the private sector has expressed. That's the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that this public space where we compete, or we, the civil society organization, one of our competitors remains the private sector. So this coexistence, and I think in many respects this bridging the gap is essential, because we don't compete only for funds, we also compete for space and time in order to express it. Having said that, I also imagine that the emergence of social movements and other informal expression of civil society of different nature. And I think Caroline again was very successful in saying that we cannot see the evolution as a linear, but as one step forward, two steps back, or two steps forward, one step back, or much more of a different kind of evolution. In terms of this social entrepreneurship side, last week we were in a different conference. It was outlined that the decrease in available funds and in other degrees, we have seen an increase in the competition among civil society organizations for the limited funds. And therefore, this is probably underlying the importance of a code of conduct on the one hand, but also probably that the narrative, or probably the way of thinking of social entrepreneurship, would dictate more and more the agenda, will indicate the road for purely civil society organization, how to look for and how to achieve and support their activities through different sources of income. And in that respect, because of the limited resources that are available, it seems, and that is actually, I think it would reinforces the notion of taking lessons from social entrepreneurship, even though most of the academics will consider it part of civil society, is that we will see the funding and the donors being more and more insisting on impact measurement, on evaluating the results, and therefore the professionalization. And again, what Caroline is mentioning, the need for capacity building, for education, to do our work more efficiently. But at the same time, this also illustrates the need for collective action, because the challenges are bigger and bigger. The other point before I move into Greece is that the arena of issues and concern in general have been increased, environmental and other issues. And so what traditionally the civil society organizations have been facing, now they have those issues have on the one hand been enlarged, have been to include other aspects, but at the same time, aspects that civil society was dealing with, they have become at the forefront. And something that would hopefully, or it seems that a lot of the donors, a lot of major organizations are putting in the agenda, is going to hopefully dominate, or at least would be dominate the desire for the development that I would like to see afterwards. And very briefly about Greece, the problem about Greece are two. One is that it's under development of civil society organization in general, and the other major thing is that the current state of the art of civil society is that an accumulated burden, which is not the result of COVID-19 only, but also because of the financial and economic crisis that had emerged earlier on, which has a positive and a negative aspects. One of them was the change of, one of them was a lot of them, which was usually to a certain degree, even though that shouldn't be the case, state-based or state dependent, they had to move on and switch and started realizing the need for self-sufficient in that respect. And a general theme, again, in the positive sense, overall, and I will stop here, is that the crisis, as it was shown, not only the crisis, the civil war, the crisis, different things, showed the flexibility of a number of organizations, their skills, which could be deployed in different areas that the ones that already existed in their charter of their operation. And illustrates exactly how successful this one and the need for an extensive partnership. And I think Dimitrios mentioned as well that we have to, if not dominate, definitely be part of the agenda and not being accepted by the donors themselves. So this is a partnership that should exist with the state side, with the market itself. And I think that institutions like the Anna Lindh Foundation, and how did they evolve the last 15 years by developing, not only managing to develop in science, but also to establish links, to establish a know-how. And for me, one of the essential things is that it has become an accredited organization, and it has developed tools that can be at the disposal of the NGOs and the civil society organizations in order to achieve their cause, underlying especially the importance and the merits of its main vehicle of operation, which is the intercultural dialogue that it profits. Thank you very much, Dimitri.
Thank you, Stefane. Yes, I mean, you've raised also a number of issues. A couple of times you talked about the need of a code of conduct, which is something that needs to be discussed, and also how one can actually learn from some of the tools of social entrepreneurship in terms of measuring impact and the capacity building that CSOs might need to focus on from now on. And the fact that the arena, it's true, the issues that civil society organizations deal with have also increased. And it makes me wonder, when you said that, whether CSOs are actually aware of what other CSOs are doing in other sectors. And maybe by focusing across sectors, one can also learn things, lessons learned or best practices, even worse practices, things to avoid. Okay, we'll move on to Anis now. And let's listen to your words of wisdom, Anis. You need to turn on your, unmute yourself. No, you're still muted, Anis. Okay, good, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very important forum. Thank you to my friends for very interesting intervention, and in this crucial time. I first of all, I would like to thank the organization of this invitation. For this invitation, it's a great pleasure to be with you again, Zeina, Dimitrios, Dr. Caroline, and Dimitrios also. So it's a big pleasure to see my colleague friends from the Anna Lindh Foundation, and to discuss the situation of civil society in the Euromed region 15 years after the Barcelona process. Huge process, and also the situation of this civil societies in the light of the COVID-19 crisis. I would like to make some observation. After 15 years of the Barcelona process, the Barcelona process has not succeeded in establishing a Euromed region of equality, fraternity, and peace. Despite the major programs put in place, the region is still a place of conflict, real danger for environmental challenges, tragedy links to illegal immigration and restriction of mobility. A huge divide between the south and the north, and the crisis, a rise of radical current on both sides. On the other hand, since 2005, hundreds of associations and NGOs have been created and have developed several cooperations program based on dialogue, understanding, and common development of the region that is a victim of endless conflict and violence. Those structures, and in spite of the great work and several networks that have been put in place, have not succeeded, unfortunately, to creating an environment of peace and mutual respect and understanding, pushing us to develop our reflection on the model of development applied on the vision for the next 15 years or 30 years. It's important to develop the reflection based on past experience and in particular in the light of COVID-19, which has restricted mobility in the Euromed space, causing several economic and even social and cultural problems. We believe that in light of this different observation funding, it is important to raise the following point, to develop more and to make the reflection and to develop the reflection on this situation. A lot of work has made, and a hundred of people we met with, and are great people who work every day, every week, every month, and every year to develop this mutual understanding. But unfortunately, still we are witness of one of the worst period of this region since the process of Barcelona. To go further, it's important to go further in developing synergy between students, universities. It's very important because we still work as NGOs, as big structure, but it's important now to enlarge and to develop more and more this those concept of dialogue, of interculturality, of mutual understanding, mutual respect, of to accept other in large population of youth, of students through the university and high schools in order to reach the maximum of students and young people, and to instill in them the values of dialogue, interculturality, and mutual understanding. Civil society cooperation between North and South is not only through cooperation between large and big NGO, and we know very well that unfortunately, because those NGOs have, unfortunately or not, but the situation is that those NGOs have the possibility, human resources and financial resources to develop the big and the huge project, and they are very known for the different founder. But also it's very important to it must also reach out to small villages and people and the most far rural area. It's not only in some, island of development, in some big town. And in Tunisia, for example, we have only two or three towns who have this dynamic of to developing project but we need to go in the very small town, very small villages, rural region, to where the big problem of understanding, of accepting other, etc. are. Review the development model in the light of ideological crimes and the rise of extremism on both sides of the region. Be more attentive to small and medium-sized, as I said, organizations that have a real knowledge of the field and of the danger in those population. For Tunisia, the big problem still added to the economic problem, which is developing into a social problem, causing a value crisis and fracture a big and open the country to several intervention and a growing fragility in its governance structures, with the crisis of, as I said, of values, encouraging the different extremism in Tunisia. In this environment, the big NGOs and also the little NGOs play a huge role to try to have this information first, but also to try to put in place some system of cooperation and of developing solution, a real solution in this very, very difficult environment of many crises. So that's very important to think more and more about the new model of development in this region. It's very important to see that it's not only problem of, project, forums, to planify a lot of money for each topics, but it's very important to understand the real causes of those problem of, let's say, mutual understanding, and comprehension of the real causes of those problems. It's very important to work more deeper and deeper on the, as I said, with the very vulnerable population, to can understand first, find a solution, and put in place a work plan to make this region, more peaceful and with less crisis, human crisis, and big problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anis. You've also raised many interesting points. The juxtaposition between, the real challenges that have been occurring over the last 25 years, environmental, migration, mobility issues, radicalization, as you said, on both shores, on both sides, but at the same time, the extensive development of civil society organizations, of NGOs doing work, but somehow all of that has not really been as much focus as it should be, right? And you also mentioned something which is dear in my heart, a focus on universities and high schools. And as you were talking about this, because I do teach a module on citizenship with a Y, which includes cities, but citizenship to my university students. And one of the things I always started off with is going back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as you were talking, I was looking again at Article 26 of the Universal Declaration, which not only talks about the right to education, but Article 26.2 basically says that there's a responsibility, this is what states have signed on to also talk about the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace, but by extension, organizations such as Anna Lindh Foundation, the EU, and every other multilateral forum we work with is an organization that believes in these values. And then when you also talked about working with the most vulnerable groups, which, it's interesting when you suggest that, yes, we also have to look at smaller areas and remote areas and small villages. Absolutely, because ultimately we end up having a dialogue among elites, civil society elites, that we can discuss this. But just as much as rural and remote areas are important, even within cities, we have a huge division with poorer neighborhoods that are never reached out. One never reaches out to. So, and I think this was also Caroline's point at the beginning about the variety of cities which we have to address, both international, but also at the local level. So a number of issues have been raised by all the speakers, and I encourage those viewing us and listening to us to add in questions. And I know some people have been busy both in the chat and the Q&A. Let me take a bit, maybe some of these questions. So Wadi, Abdel Wadi is asking a question. He says, one of the most important challenges related to cultural dialogue and the Euromed partnership in general is the escalation of polarization and intolerance in the Mediterranean region, especially freedom of expression and the pluralistic identity. What are the new roles of civil society, especially in times of the pandemic? So it's something to keep in mind, to get back to later. Harry Roge talks about the North-South Center initiated by the Council of Europe and a number of other processes that deal with civil society in the Euromed area. And then there are also, Wadi also talks about funds being a difficult thing in the Q&A. The mobilization of access to funds, which is an issue that all of you have brought up. Dimitris Kavouras from Alexandria, hi Dimitri, asks, what is your opinion of each speaker on the future vision of Euromed civil society? Should we maybe, so we have this one, we have the issue about Wadi's initial question about the role of civil society, especially in times of a pandemic, which some of you have already addressed, and about the future vision of Euromed civil society. And then there's one more question, and then we'll go back later to this. I'll give you guys a chance to maybe respond, by Esther Fouchier. Well, in the last 25 years, women have emerged in the public space with their competences and perspectives, and this has changed the course of things. Do you agree with this or not? She asked the question in French. I just translated in English. So who would like to talk? And well, let's take the last one also, maybe. So, well, how are CSOs including minorities in their daily work? By Emna Jrasia. Who wants to take the, address some of these questions that have been raised?
Maybe I'll start.
All right, Caroline.
I think also to Esther, I'm very pleased that she is with us and listening to us, because of course the whole question of the role and the situation of women is and remains of particular importance to civil society, and of course also to our foundation. And maybe tying up the situation of women to what we are now seeing with the pandemic. I just make a comment which I can't yet, underline as being, it's just a thesis, but we do see we've got a lot of people losing work. So if we tie up the situation pandemic, the situation of demography, where we know that, of course, we have civil society on our side of the Med, aging society. So maybe, but at the same time, in many countries, we have high unemployment even before the pandemic. In Spain, in France, also I think in Italy and Greece. I'm not so sure of the figures there. And on the other side, of course, we've got even higher unemployment and a very dynamic, very young population. So my anxiety is that this will put more pressure on the role of women, and that we have to be very, very aware of this. Because if we look sort of historically speaking, women are pulled into all sorts of things and given space when there's nobody else around, when the men are not around. I'm just being rather sort of pointed at this. But it is a historical thing we can look at. So I am most anxious about the situation of women and of young women and their perspectives in a situation where we see many, many young men who find themselves in a situation without clear perspective. So obviously, Stefanos, what you were saying, the whole question of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship is of importance. And I think within the framework of reflection of what we are doing, also the question of competition, even at the level of our CSO organizations and so on. So how do we get together to have more intelligent clusters of putting our knowledge and also the resources we have more effectively together? That would be, I don't have an answer, but I think it is a point that we really, really have to make visible, that this is a necessity, which was there before the pandemic, but is even more important as a result of what is now happening with the pandemic.
Thank you, Caroline. Who wants to tackle that question or some of the other ones that were raised? Stefanos, Anis, Zeina? Nobody?
I can a very brief intervention in terms of this part is that It might sound obscure, what I would say, but it's an interesting parameter which shows that women have gained their voice. And I think the Arab Spring has actually underlined their leading role in a certain way. And it's very interesting, which might sound a little bit initially something strange to see it positively. This is the mention that after the Arab Spring in Egypt, we have much more, we have seen women, much more cases of sexual harassment and violence against women. Why do I see that positive? Is it really the case where we have an incredible increase in the number of these cases, or do we have a case where women have realized that they have a saying, they have a right, and therefore they went publicly to state this further affairs? I guess the truth is somewhere in between, but in any respect, this is something that illustrates not only it's not mentality change, but it's the courage of such women to go ahead and therefore claim the role in such an environment. There was another issue here, another question, but I think I will keep it for later on the Greek-Turkish relations and the role of civil society.
Yes. Zeina, Anish, anything you want to add from the
questions?
questions?
If you allow me, I would like to summarize some answer about many questions. Thank you to all our friends for the very interesting question. First, I would like to say that Arab Spring is not Arab, and it's not spring. Also, it was not in the spring, it was in the... really, the beginning, till the beginning in 2011, we was not agree about this appellation of Arab Spring because it was hard, it was difficult, it was violent, it was not the spring, but it was revolution, and it was very difficult, and it's a process. Spring is very punctual. It's a process. Till now in Tunisia, the process was not end. And as you can see in the other countries, the process is still not it's the cow sometimes in some countries, etc. Second, I would like to answer to my friend Dimi about the future vision of the Euromed civil society. I think that it's important to work on the concept and on the value, not on the titles. When we talk about peace, it should be a real peace, not a piece of conference or piece of televisions, of piece of speech. When we talking about ending poverty, it should be a real ending poverty, to understand what's the needs of people, the basic need of people. We have some countries and some people didn't find food and water. In some Euromed countries, it's a shame for our humanity, and it's a shame for our when we said that we are a real actor of development of civil society, etc. I think that we need to talk frankly, to look at each other and to say that perhaps we need to be more and more real, and not to work on only appellation, very beautiful titles of when we say development, when we say ending poverty, when we say establishing peace, when we said human rights, when we say the environment, etc. Because the situation is very critical. The environment situation is very critical, and I think that in the next year, to answer for the future vision, those titles will not resist. We can develop many forums and develop many good titles, and etc. but without a real intervention on the ground, without a real changement with vulnerable people and a real understanding of the needs of the people in this region, and I'm also talking about the sub-Saharan Africa and the huge problem of those countries who will influence the Maghreb region and automatically the European region and the whole of the world. So I think that we should stop. And I know that there is a very, very, very important people as we have with us today, Stefanos, Caroline, Zeina, and many, many others who are real people who want a real changement. And we think that we should stop and to discuss on the real problem. Second, and it's a process, as I said. Democracy is a process. Liberty is freedom is process. Development is a process. We cannot say today that, okay, we will develop something and we will have it for the end of the day or for the end of the world, or this country is, even in France, as we saw now, democracy with this law of security, etc., is always a continuous fight between different categories and different castes in the society. So it's very important to have this in conscience that it's a process. And as I said, the resistance of women, the resistance of youth, the resistance of vulnerable people should develop more and more, and we should create a new concept to answer the new challenges.
Anis. Zeina?
Yes, I agree, of course, with everything that was said by Anis, Caroline, and
like
Stefanos.
Always. Thank you, Zeina.
I just wanted to add one tiny thing, that civil society organizations are willing and able to make changes, although it needs time. They just need to be adequately resourced and given the opportunity to work on the ground and be able to do their jobs properly. So resources are keys.
Thank you. Actually, there's one question in particular, maybe a couple of them, and then I'll read them out, and then maybe go for also a round where we can also look ahead in the future. Because, one of the things you were saying, Annie, is a need for a real intervention on the ground. And I keep saying, well, we have been talking about this forever. It's not like it's a new concept. You're absolutely right. Even in 95 with the Euromed process, and before that, and since that, this is one of the things that people actively involved in civil society have been talking about, right? So what needs to give? How do we change that? Is something that comes to mind. But let me read the question. So there is a question by Zuhalu Nalpchelep who talks about the future of Greek-Turkish civil society dialogue. So she narrows it down to Greek-Turkish civil society dialogue. Do you think political leaders have significant importance to overcome the problems in the region? Can the pandemic be an opportunity to overcome the crisis? And this is more for Stefanos, but anyone else could also answer. I have an answer, but I'm not a speaker, so it's okay. Then Wadi, who's been very active, is talking about major geostrategic shifts. Yes, because someone has dubbed this age as the geopolitical age, right? Systemic change is underway. So how does it impact? So do you think that the Euro-Mediterranean partnership has reached difficult challenges that require strengthening neighborhood policies and North-South cooperation? Okay. Then, yes, Inet Ialit had written a comment about different funding mechanisms that exist, EA funds, EU funds, and others addressed at issues of women's equality, fighting against violence against women and girls, and so on. And then There's a debate here, yes, by Esther, yes, who seconds that, right? That as a member of the lobby, the European Lobby for Women, and with FFM. Okay, so so the question basically is here that too, the geostrategic shift and how this impact, and then the Greek-Turkish civil society dialogue. But as you respond, also let us consider a little bit, where do we go from here? I think Zeina, when she ended her presentation, said about, do we have any recommendations as to how to move forward? Because if I might say, it's very interesting listening to you. A lot of the issues that we've raised are issues that are raised, you know, in debates and discussions among civil society organizations everywhere. Stefanos alluded, last week he was in another forum we were together, and some of these issues came up where our audience were basically people from the eastern neighborhood of the European Union. And we talked about civil society. And so many of the issues I've heard from you are the same: the funding issue, how do you cope with the reality of the world that's coming, the COVID-19 restrictions. Someone else had a very interesting thing, and I kept thinking when Anis was talking about reaching to remote areas, someone, a participant from Italy, was telling us how one of the trends of COVID, which is very interesting, is in Italy proper, there is a center periphery movement from the center to the periphery, and a movement from the north to the south, which means that people working either in big cities or especially cities of the north, because of COVID, and especially because if they're lucky to work behind a desk on a computer where you can work anywhere, have been moving back to their cities and villages, in particular in the south, while they're working still for the north, so for employees in Milan and Turin and wherever. But as they're moving to the north, they are also the ones that are especially active in civil society, creating new clusters of civil society in the villages, their hometowns and villages that they move back. And it's not organized per se, but there seems to be a movement to try to deal with some of the issues in their particular cities, which is also an interesting development. Anyway, you want to go first, Stefanos, because there's a particular question about the Greek-Turkish civil society dialogue, and then...
Yeah, actually, in order to answer to this one, then I'm afraid we will have to deal with the other part of it, which is the systemic changes, and which you have outlined, you know, the emergence of competing poles, militarization, so on and so forth. And this is, for me, something that we have also been discussing with Dimitrios, is that all those changes that are taking place, at least in my mind, is something like, is it really that, do they really represent the people of those countries involved in those regions? For me, it becomes more and more that they seem to be detached from society at large, and those movements are more and more, which foreign policy and security issues are per se an elitist practice. And this is the very dangerous waters when it comes to civil society. That has civil society, can it really play a role, a positive role, that's what I mean, if we consider that military actions are the Saruman of the area, for those who are familiar with the Lord of the Rings, or the big enemy of something that we like to avoid as much as possible. And because any such movement from any civil society organization will easily be labeled as traitors, as anti-ethnic, and so on and so forth. So this is the major challenge, and for the civil society, how to create a critical mass that are supportive of such notion and of friendship towards the other side, so that they can develop a counter argument, a counter narrative vis-a-vis the tendencies that already exist. Now, if I want to move on this one and bring it into the Greek-Turkish civil society dialogue, I'm not pessimistic per se, but I don't see it needs a lot of boosting. Paradigms, the case studies in the past illustrate how important it is. I think the breaking point of Greek-Turkish rapprochement in the 90s was the major earthquake, which paved the way and which challenged the dominant notion that each one of us wants to destroy the other one. and this paved the way, and we have experienced a long period of love of friendship, a lot of peaceful coexistence. Nonetheless, even during that time, we have seen that this dialogue between civil society organizations was not to the level that we have liked it to be. And whether the processes are there, yes, they are the process, but I'm afraid that this is more in the hands of the civil society per se, rather than of the states themselves at the current era. And maybe a breakthrough or a way through is the international forum like the Anna Lindh Foundation and others to develop activities that would allow for such a thing to be tested and therefore to be good paradigms. Having said that, I'm afraid that there is much more skepticism on the Greek side rather than on the Turkish side. Let's be honest with that side. And with the final, overall point, I just want to make, I totally agree with what Anissa is saying. That's a process, but I also like to consider that if we want to really be successful, or if we want to be effective, we cannot ignore the reality, the pragmatism. We need a strategy that would allow us to move a step by step towards the next level. And having said that, in the post-COVID-19, or in whatever is going on already, and where we'll be competing for less money available and so on and so forth, or we have to realize, all of us who are in this field, that even though we consider what the aim that we serve in our organization and institutions are probably the most important, that there are actually certain groups which are very fragile, which are very sensitive, and whether we like it or not, they will have to take precedence in being assisted. As some of you mentioned, the work of many civil societies because of the lockdown was halted because they couldn't have access to the groups they were serving. And in those disadvantaged groups will have to take priority in whatever actions and whatever strategies we'll have to implement in the next steps. Thank you.
Stefan, I mean, if I may quickly add, in terms of Greek-Turkish civil society dialogue, there was another element. The earthquake helped in starting it, but it was all predicated on Turkey's EU accession process. And so without that in place, it creates a whole bunch of issues as well. The fact that that process has stalled and might not be going anywhere. So there's a need, as you said, of a new paradigm that's necessary. But this is also an element to consider. But who wants to take the floor? So let's also look a little bit at the future. Recommendations, where we are going. Yes, Caroline, go ahead. Go ahead, you're ready.
Yes. Maybe I just address very quickly the question of geostrategic shifts. I think geostrategic shifts are certainly a major element in what's happening, and very often they are mid-term, long-term, and we don't really, and they are a process, and we don't always exactly. We're not in a position immediately to see what is changing. So I think that is an important thing to remember. But then maybe to tie that into what Vadi was also asking before, you know, how can we learn to use our multiple identities and our multiple roles which we have as persons, so that we don't fall into the trap of sort of reacting in a nativist or nationalist, neo-nationalist way to the sort of, when we suddenly realize there are trends or there are disruptive things happening which take us back into, you know, sort of interrupt the processes we're in of learning to be more sort of variant and tolerant in all these things. So maybe we have to remember we do have, I said at the start, we need analysis, and we do have our intercultural trends and social change survey at the Anna Lindh Foundation. We have the Arab Youth Survey, A Voice for Change, just to mention two, one from the north, well, one from the whole and one from the south, which are important, but at the same time, we are missing out. We are missing out on what is happening at the, was it Anis who said, we have to look at the realities at the floor. And I think what we have to try to look at for the future is, I think, one major step is to realize what we know and to communicate what we know in a better fashion. I mean, we are sitting here today as 4 heads of networks. And when we look at our networks, it's amazing the projects which are in the network. In the smaller networks, they may know all their active members. We don't, but we've just sent out our newsletter today with some very interesting projects. And I think we have to know and combine across space not just the ideas and the best practice, but maybe also use these associations and CSOs or NGOs, which are part of our foundation, as sounding boards. And Dimi, I think it was you who said, and I so much agree with this, it's not just a question of having ideas and having best practice and putting tools in place and tying that up into some kind of a strategy, which will be midterm and has to be adapted according to disruptive processes or whatever. We have to monitor worst practice. And that's something we are not good at doing, and we don't do. We are so much, very much also, which I think is also important, talking about best practice and ideals, but we have to also monitor and use our members who we trust to give us indications of worst practice and changing practice at the very local level, so that we can use the modern tools of webinars maybe to discuss these kind of things, and so to adapt within strategies or processes which we are at the moment building up. I really think it's an important point, because we tend really not to look at that very much, and it could help us in identifying better the effects of best practice and the kind of way we have to move forward. Reflection, as Anis was saying, we have to reflect as an ongoing practice within what we are doing. Sorry, so that was just a comment again.
Very good. I mean, you've raised a number of interesting points, and we should keep them in mind. I mean, you stressed again the issue of communicating better and using our CSOs, the CSOs in your national networks as sounding boards, and also looking at the worst practice, not just best practices, but maybe methodologically this might be a way forward. Because it's about addressing, all right, your reference in particular, which was to Anis's point about the realities on the ground. So this might be one way to do this, and we have to do it more systematically. Anis, Zeina, who wants to enrich this debate? We have 5 or 6 more minutes, so Anis, go ahead, and then Zeina is last. Yeah.
No, go, Zeina. Ladies first.
Thank you. No, I wanted to say thank you to Caroline for raising this question. It's very interesting to talk about the worst practice instead of always focusing on the best practice, so that we can learn from our mistakes and move forward. Also, I think it's important that civil society organizations shed light on their work and share it, and the media can play a role as well in showing and showcasing their work and broadcasting everything that's being done on the field. And I think there's a responsibility of the state as well, and they should acknowledge and recognize the civil society's vital contributions to response and recovery. They should target part of their emergency financial support to sustain and enable civil society, involve civil society in partnerships, and share relevant information with them as well. And donors can make a difference. They should be flexible with their support to civil society during the current period, and especially in times of crisis. And there's a need to make funding available and flexible. So this is the donor part. And civil society as well have the responsibility to pursue networking and partnerships within and beyond civil society, so that they can create more partnerships and more synergies locally, nationally, and internationally. And international institutions as well can work more closely with civil society to promote international cooperation and build greater support for the development of stronger and more effective institutions, and so that we can tackle all the problems that may arise. So this is it mainly.
I mean, you've raised a number of very interesting points, and I think it was something which is interesting. You said the assistance to civil society, in particular emergency assistance. So this is interesting also, how maybe within the concept of humanitarian assistance, because this is what's happened in Lebanon,
yes,
civil society can also be recipients of that. I don't know if it's actually done or more systematically. Maybe
it was some of them, yes.
Some. Anis, your thoughts, and also maybe you'll address the one comment by Harry about what happened to the to the Euromed the forum in Šibenik that was cancelled.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What can I say after Caroline, Stefanos, and Zeina? Really, it's very interesting, and thank you, my friends, for this very interesting contributions. I think that it's, we have many ways to execute any project. We can just, tick in the boxes, realize some trainings, realize some forums, etc. And the founder are very happy. Everyone is very happy, but it's not the real. And I think that when we talk about it, that we need to develop the process of our work as NGOs and as also founders. It's not a problem of how many people reach, KPIs, etc. No, we need to have a real quality of our work. Second, I'm totally agree with Caroline when she said it's issue of communication, etc. But also, but also it's a problem and it's fight of mentalities. We are working with, when we are talking about the little villages, etc., and very far villages, etc. I can be in Brussels to discuss the and it's my experience, and I was a witness of this thing. I was in Brussels to discuss the big strategy of youth, of mobilities, and etc., and I returned to Tunisia, and I was invited in a little workshop with a small organization in a little village, and I hear the point of view of the mayor, which he have no idea about the work of NGOs, and for him the NGOs are very, it's folklore, it's something, something not very capital, and it's cute and it's beautiful, but okay, we can involve them for the festival to distribute flyers, etc., but no more. And in Corona demonstrate that without SCO, many countries will collapse, really. And many NGOs are doing very huge work to help administration, to help to have different governmental direction to develop in the development, agriculture and health, etc., etc. So our fight also, it's a fight of against fight of mentality to create partnership. Yes, Zeina, totally agree. International institution perhaps should, like Anna Lindh Foundation, perhaps should develop a mechanism of monitoring and to help the head of networks, or to help us to develop more and more the accompaniment or to follow the little organization who make a real work on ground and real changement in their very far village of 1,000 people and 100 people, etc. Those villages also are the source of, unfortunately, extremism and radicalism and a huge number of problems and issues for all the region, not only in Tunisia, but also in Arab world, in Europe, etc., etc. So that's very important also that those institutions, huge institutions, can develop the les relais, means different steps of cooperation, not only with a big organization like them, but also to develop other mechanisms of to follow these little initiatives. Thank you.
Well, I think we've come to the end. I mean, it's an hour and a half, and I didn't realize it went so by so fast. I took lots of notes. I see many of you have also taken notes. Lots of food for thought here. One last point, it was interesting because Anis, you were talking about the need to develop a different sort of identity for NGOs. I mean, this was a point that last week in this workshop that Stefanos and I attended, one of our facilitators who is from Romania and is actually actively involved in NGOs, was talking about civil society organizations need to rethink sort of what their values are. And not a statement saying we do this. Use maybe a business approach. How do businesses identify themselves uniquely and say, very clear mission statement about what they are? And this has also given CSOs right now, as they consider the difficulties of what they can and cannot do. And then you think about the future, right? A hybrid world, dealing with funders, and funders are also thinking. I mean, I have my funders in activities that I do track, non-formal education activities, saying, well, we see the world as hybrid. And I've been doing, events online for the first time that I've never done before. It was always in-person meetings. So how do I do this, right? And the same thing applies to CSOs. So there's also a lot of introspections, I think, that CSOs have to go through to reshape their message based on the real needs as well of what is actually happening. Because the world is getting, the funding issue is going to be out there, and the issues we have to focus on are just as relevant. And last point too, the radicalization issues, you said it correctly, it's on both sides. I mean, Caroline also started talking about this. I was reading something the other day where in Germany, there's even a correlation between where the AfD is actually doing well and the naysayers to COVID and the vaccine. There's a direct correlation in some of the places where their numbers are high, and people that do not believe that there's COVID out there, that there's no need to vaccinate and there's no need to take measures. And think of the impact all of this has on societies and other marginal groups as well. Anyway, thank you very much. This was interesting. It's the first of our webinars. We'll be in touch soon. Stefanos and I and our other project partners will be working on this project, and hopefully we'll have some interesting findings. And have a great evening, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Much appreciated. Bye.